how do you discard maybe those things without losing your soul or whatever, losing the core of what it is that makes the things that you were told true. And so I really struggled with that for a while, and then I kind of just stopped caring.
You are listening to Fruitless, a podcast hosted by me, Josiah Sutton. This is episode, It's 15 with Josh Boerman from Worst of All Possible Worlds, entitled Secular Media and American Loneliness, where we talk about growing up evangelical and also the general loneliness of American life right now. I hope you enjoy. Welcome to Fruitless. I am joined today by Josh Boerman of Worst of All Possible Worlds. Say hello and all that.
I am saying hello.
Welcome.
And I am excited to be hanging out again. It's been a bit. And
it's been a minute, yeah.
I'm also excited to do something relatively low energy for once, because I feel like our show is just, I am on.
Yeah, it's high energy, yeah.
And so I need to exist in a slightly less manic space today.
Yeah.
So I hope that's all right with you.
No, that's perfect. That's what I'm trying to do with Fruitless anyway. So it kind of fits it. I like the casual conversation. Well, the subject I gave you broadly was just, you are a fellow product of the evangelical world, right?
Yeah.
You were raised in it broadly. And so I thought it would be interesting, since, you reference that a lot on the show, but you haven't had an episode where you just kind of talk about your background there with that, to kind of get into that subject. Of course, that's a really big subject, could go anywhere. And so I'm kind of good with it going wherever, but I guess maybe start off, good question would just be what was your relationship to evangelicalism, and when did you kind of feel like you left it?
Sure. So, I, first of all, should just say, hello, I'm Josh. I'm co-host of the Worst of All Possible Worlds. In case you're not familiar with our show, we do weekly case studies in the pop culture of a dying empire. We have a particular fascination on evangelical culture because it provides a unique window into the reactionary mind. And recapping episodes of Adventures in Odyssey is always a good time. And we've actually had Josiah on the show, so if you're interested in that, you should go check it out. We had a great time talking about... What did we talk about again? I'm trying to remember.
It was a lot of Eugene episodes.
Okay, it was Eugene-centric stuff, yeah.
Yeah, it was Eugene. It was with there was a bunch of Pog jokes the whole time.
Yes. Because it was a lot about Katrina Shanks, who is voiced by Pamela Hayden, who, of course, is also the voice of Millhouse.
That's right, yeah.
But yeah, so part of the reason, though, that we do talk about evangelical culture and pop culture especially is that it is what I grew up with,
right.
as well as my co-host Brian. I would say that the church that I grew up in was sort of right on the line between being mainline and being evangelical.
Okay,
I think it does ultimately fall down on the evangelical side of things, because the focus did end up being first and foremost, how do we go out? How do we save people? How do we reform the world, right? That's in the tradition of the Reformed Church. So there was that. But a lot of my exposure to the super duper evangelical media was actually through the local Baptist college radio station.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. I grew up in a town called Grand Rapids, Michigan. There is a radio station, 91.3 WCSG, and the tower is in frequency are owned by, or at least leased by, Cornerstone University, formerly known as Cornerstone College. And before that, I think it was called Grand Rapids Baptist College. And their whole thing was, we need to use the radio as a form of bringing in souls, right?
Okay, yeah.
So it was a lot of listening to things like Adventures in Odyssey and Christian Top 40 radio, which, CCM is sort of its whole other parallel world. And
yeah, absolutely.
Reading books, reading the books that were available, because at that time, I'm just old enough that I was able to shop in Christian bookstores. Like I'm not quite young enough for when those started to go away, which I think you're maybe slightly on the other end of that age gap.
But it was from Iowa, and I feel like the culture
Sure.
is a little lagged behind. So
behind cosmopolitan West Michigan.
Right, of course. No, but I mean, just even the proximity to large cities is different with Michigan versus Iowa.
Yeah.
And so I don't know, there were Christian bookstores, but it is something that started disappearing right when I was, so that would line up actually right when I was I never bought anything with my own money.
You didn't have your own, like you weren't able to go into a family Christian store and spend your own money.
No, I was just following around my parents and looking at the Adventures in Odyssey tapes or whatever.
Right. So, yeah, it was a lot of consumption of that kind of media, and anybody who knows anything about media knows that the media that you consume often shapes your reality, and that's exactly how it was for me. I was hearing on the one end these messages about how you ought to be, how your morals ought to be, how you ought to engage with the world, and then I also went to a Christian school, which was sort of doubling down on the same lessons just from a pedagogical perspective. Like, I went back through like my box of shit that my parents hung on to from when I was a little kid, and found a whole bunch of old like homework assignments from second grade, third grade, whatever. And a lot of them are about like, talk about a time that God helped you with, blah, 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 as a writing exercise, like that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So you're being sort of trained to, if you are somebody who likes to engage with the world intellectually, which I always was, even as a kid, using my early writing faculties and stuff like that, it was always through the lens of, how did God help you do this? Or how do you communicate this thing as an expression of your faith?
Yes.
And I didn't really even understand, honestly, the idea of creating something that was, like, even the idea of, if you are a Christian, creating something that doesn't talk about God in some way, shape, or form felt impossible. Because why would you? Why would you ever do something like that?
Yeah. Oh man, this I find that incredibly relatable. That's absolutely it. Is like, I remember it being at some Bible camp or whatever, where there was this guy who was bragging about the fact that he stopped reading any books except for the Bible, and everyone looked at him like, oh man, this guy's got it, and. I remember this exact, like, I don't know, actually, it kind of comes out in the way they talk about, like, secular culture. The word secular is kind of thrown around a lot, right? And what's interesting is, like, until, probably embarrassingly older, like maybe out of high school, early college, didn't realize that secular just meant not religious. I always took it to mean anti-religious.
Right.
Which is like, just a completely different thing. But there's only stuff that's inside and stuff that's outside with a lot of evangelical culture. There's not like a gray, really.
Remind me, you grew up Lutheran Missouri Synod? Is that, am I getting that right?
No, actually, I'm also from a Reformed denomination. I'm RCA. I was RCA.
Oh, RCA.
Yeah.
Oh, you're the wrong Reformed.
One.
You're the wrong one. You're the ones that we had to cleave away from. That's the funny thing for people who don't know. There was a Dutch Reformed church that came over from the Netherlands, of course, and was established. And then it didn't take too long, because these people were fucking freaks, for one subset of them to be like, you're not doing it the right way. And we're going to go ahead and found something called the True Dutch Reformed Church. Which ended up, of course, becoming known as the Christian Reformed Church in North America, CRCNA, which is the denomination that I grew up in.
The rival denomination. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
That's
the
super interesting. Yeah. So like my fast version is my parents, when I converted in like 93 and I was born in 97. So they were like new converts. And so they originally were at an ELCA church before they started pivoting liberal.
Wait, were they Christian? They didn't.
No, they didn't grow up Christian.
Christian?
They were born again evangelicals.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, and then that Yeah, so then, when I was born in 97, they were going to an ELCA church, that was before it pivoted liberal. Sure. So it's just it was an evangelical church. And they hopped around from some churches into some weird charismatic denominations. And then my dad got really into Reformed theology. They found an RCA church. Rest is history, right?
Sure.
Then, I spent probably like my teens in the E-Free denomination. And then left the faith. And when I came back as a lib Episcopalian. So.
So where does the RCA fall into that then?
Oh, so like up until like my teens would be when that ends. Yeah.
Gotcha. So you know what I mean about how like it's not quite evangelical, but it's not evangelical.
I was going to say I related to that aspect of your upbringing also because my church wasn't actually where I got the evangelicalism.
Right.
And so that's actually why the Episcopal Church kind of fit really naturally to me because it's the more liturgical stuff.
Yeah.
The liturgical stuff wasn't poisoned as much to me as like the evangelical stuff. So the evangelical stuff I got from being homeschooled and being around homeschoolers.
And how long were you homeschooled for?
All of my schooling except like a briefly dual enrolled in middle school.
Okay. I don't think I knew that you were homeschooled the whole time.
The whole time. Now, like my high school experience, there were these like co-ops, which was just school for once a week, and then people did homework.
I remember talking about that with you.
Yeah. So that was my high school experience, but yeah. No, I did it the whole way through.
Fun.
I think there's aspects of it I like, but I think it broke my brain also in other ways, like just that lack of structure.
I told you about how at my local homeschool building, because I was homeschooled in 7th grade only. Okay. I came across a book in that library called The Socialization Trap, which was about how like you might think that if you homeschool your kids that you need to have them socialize with other kids, but
That's
you're
bullshit.
Fucking wrong, you monster.
Well, I know how a lot of the homeschool families dealt with that question was just have enough kids that it does become a social event.
And that was exactly the arc that this book was making. Yeah.
Of course it was like quiverful shit.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, it's kind of a similar thing where there's kind of a toe in evangelicalism and toe out kind of same background. Cause that was always the thing that was kind of odd is I had fundamentalism floating around, but then also my dad, liked philosophy and liked movies and shit. So I was, raised in an evangelical home, but exposed to like Coen Brothers movies, which is a weird combination.
I mean, I just sought out Coen Brothers movies on my own. I remember the first time I saw O Brother Where Art Thou, I was like, this is the best thing I've ever seen.
Yeah, I grew up as like, that's a movie I'm nostalgic about because my dad
would a great movie.
Watch it like once a year. So
Lebowski too.
Lebowski's great.
And I'm trying to just think of like the movies, especially like comedies that really grabbed me. Because going to the point of like suddenly finding that there's a bigger world out there, it was stuff like that. Office Space was another one that I just loved and still do. I went back and watched it. That movie really still holds up.
It really does. Yeah. Yeah, I watched that recently too. Yeah, it's solid.
But it was consuming then secular media. That made me think about life outside the bubble a little bit, because even though I grew up reading a lot of different books, because I was, the library was just up the block. I'd go there all the time. The librarians all knew me by name. They'd always have a new book to recommend me, because I was just such a voracious reader. And obviously every librarian loves the little kid who comes in and is like, what new books are there?
Right.
I got some exposure to that from reading, but there was something about like, I did not have a similar experience with film. I was not watching good movies from a young age. I was reading pretty good books from a young age, but with movies, it was just like I was mostly eating the gruel. And so there was something about getting the good shit where I was like, oh, there is a whole other world of media out there that actually isn't bad, like bad in a moral sense. Like this does not offend my morals, even being a 14-year-old mostly evangelical teenager trying to figure it out.
There's still plenty of media that wouldn't offend your morals. Yeah, absolutely.
Like this is pointing to things that I find to be true in a remarkable, fundamentally deep and beautiful and still funny way. And it's way fucking better than Adventures in Odyssey,
Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Coen Brothers. Like even now, one of the one of the movies that I did not watch this one as a kid, but I found it more as an adult and has been really moving to me on like a spiritual level is A Serious Man, which is a great movie. And it's not a movie I would have watched at that age because I'd be like, well, it's about, Judaism. And, it's not of my faith. It's not about what I, and it's not evangelical.
We don't want you slipping into temptation. Come on.
Of course. But yeah, I would say like, I felt this, I feel like a lot of what you're saying too with like, I don't know, there would be cultural objects or whatever that were like out of the periphery that you might hold on to as like, this is an interesting thing that like, whatever. I had some of that. But I think what was the hardest part to get past for me was, I went on and studied philosophy in college. And so like a big part of it was...
Did you go to a Christian school or where'd
I did not actually. So I took a year after high school, didn't go to college. Then I went to a community college for the first 2 years.
Okay.
And then went to the school I went to is technically a Christian college, but it's like one of the ones that's not a Christian college anymore.
Sure.
It just was made by the Methodists in the 19th century, Simpson College.
Okay.
So
yeah, a lot of those like Methodist and Congregationalist schools are now technically still affiliated, but like
they're just a private school. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's like so but like studying like philosophy, especially, which I was into by the end of high school and during the year off, was I was stuck always having to reconcile philosophies I liked with the worldview I had. I had like this ongoing need to like, if I read this, well, how can I actually twist it to be, pro-Christian? So like I had this problem in high school of like, I got really into Freud, and I still am kind of into psychoanalysis and stuff. And so I had to be like, well, it makes sense with Reformed theology because the id is the sin nature. There, I made it make sense.
Yeah.
And
it was sin nature. I do love this. We love the sin nature.
We love the sin nature. We love it. And it was only finally into probably like, once I was like 20 or 21 that I was starting to be able to be like, I can just like a philosophy without it having to reconcile every aspect of it.
Or can you? That way lies Satan. Or so I'm told. They call him the tempter for a reason.
That's right. I think what it would be is the Satan called relativism. That's always the fear. Moral relativism.
Maybe a Frank Peretti style demon named moral relativism perched on your shoulders, digging its claws into you.
That's right. Yep. But I don't know. Did you have that same like need to kind of like reconcile shit with your worldview whenever you were faced with something outside of it, or?
The interesting thing about the Reformed perspective, and that's big air quotes for you listening at home, is this idea that there is no such thing as something that is truly secular, like that the ideas of the secular and sacred world, that's sort of a false dichotomy. Even though that was a framing that I was very familiar with because, again, I was listening to so much Baptist content. Basically, I was listening to a lot of different things at a lot of different points and trying to make all of it work together, I think, because of the fact that, there were certain ideas that were like held in fundamental tension with each other. And it's like, well, how do you make this work? And also, how do you take the fact that there's a lot of unbelievably annoying shit that doesn't make sense, but you're just being told that it does make sense actually over and over and over again.
Yeah.
How do you discard maybe those things without losing your soul or whatever, losing the core of what it is that makes the things that you were told true? And so I really struggled with that for a while, and then I kind of just stopped caring, honestly.
Yeah.
Because it turned out that like a lot of these things that were being presented to me as things that you need to be really, really worried about were not things that I was worried about. They were just things that I was expected to have to worry about. Social attitudes around the way that you ought to present yourself, the way that you ought to think about connections, sexuality, things like that, right? And all of that, and just being like, no, well, maybe this is all just stupid and sucks. That was kind of what it was, honestly. I don't have a more interesting or nuanced answer than that. I wasn't going through a long, dark night of the soul,
Interesting.
I was mostly just being like, oh no, I kind of hate this actually.
Yeah. I mean, so like, I think with me, I had a much more dark night of the soul kind of, way out. And I think part of that was, I think I internalized it so much that I had a really hard time as I was having my doubts or whatever, reconciling it. And it turned into like just cognitive dissonance all the time rather than just kind of losing it slowly. It just turned into like, and especially even just like shitty, like stupid things, not like deep philosophical things, but just like really, really realizing I hated CCM. Just didn't like how it sounded. But like, if if you don't like that sound of music, that ruins going to church.
Yeah.
Because that's like what the evangelical churches do as their music.
Yeah, you're not wrong.
Yeah, and so like even though it's just a stupid cultural like just beef and like not liking the style of music, it ruins it for you. So I would feel guilty about it, and like had that for just like constant sense of guilt for not liking worship music.
That's annoying. So when you were presented with music and you were expected to say wow, you did not.
I did not say wow.
In fact, say wow to that.
No. Yeah, and I think that's almost part my dad's fault again too, because again he exposed me to a lot of secular media and stuff like that. Like I mentioned, being into Coen Brothers and stuff. So like I don't know, he raised us with like Bob Dylan and Dead Kennedys, and then was surprised when we weren't vibing with the CCM shit.
Well, okay, so this is interesting though. Let's talk about CCM because like it's such a specific thing, right? The sort of tonal quality of it, the way that the composition works, the way that the songs are like they're precision engineered to sort of get a very specific emotional response out of you. Yeah. Because I did like CCM actually.
Okay. Yeah.
I really did, and I think I still have a piece of my heart that exists in abiding love for cheesy trance music. Like Armin van Buuren and Ferry Corsten and shit like that. And I think honestly that it's those really euphoric melodies and big sing-offs and breakdowns and stuff like that. Those are the trance and CCM have those things in common. And it's not good, but I can't help myself.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it is good at conveying an emotion. There's a handful of songs that I was okay with, but I think part of the problem was just, again, if you're a guitar playing teenager, you get roped into playing those songs nonstop also. And
well, I was a piano playing kid, so the chords, love the chords, man.
Oh, like,
those chords are fun to play.
I bet, yeah. No, that's kind of interesting. I think that would have like a different experience with it, because I have a few friends also who are like really liked worship music, and that has to be its own kind of weird thing, especially when you leave it, because then you have kind of a weird relationship with worship music when you hear it. Well, probably.
But at the same time, like although I enjoyed it, those songs never had deep emotional resonance for me.
Okay.
Whereas some old hymns do, and I think it's very similar. Like I've talked about this sort of stuff too with, like my Jewish friends who have a very strong connection to like the liturgies and the Kaddish and stuff like that, where it's like there's something about those words being spoken in particular or sung, in the way that they are always spoken and sung at very specific and high impact points in your life. Yeah. You go to a funeral and you hear "Great is Thy Faithfulness," and that's going to be hard to get through, like there's something very emotional about this idea of like, even though things suck, there's also good things out there, and I'm going to get through it. That is very, very, very powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. I especially you mentioning old hymns, I think, especially because for me, that's what I found as I've gotten older too, is that I get more emotional reaction out of that stuff than something that feels like it's trying really hard with reverb pedals to make me feel an emotion. The hymns just have a piano and they tell you what they're saying in a very straightforward way. And then, I don't know, because of that, there's a lot of emotions I can project onto, Come Thou Fount or whatever.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, like, I'm just... Now I'm just going to really dunk. I mean, there is nothing to the lyric, what a beautiful name it is, what a beautiful name it is, the name of Jesus Christ my King, what a beautiful name it is. Nothing compares to this, what a beautiful name it is, the name of Jesus. That's nothing.
That doesn't mean
That's
anything.
nothing.
Yeah, absolutely. Because the hymns just have, I don't know, they do have just something like lyrically that still it's communicating.
Well, it has specificity to it.
Yeah.
It's communicating an actual place, an actual feeling, and an actual sense of something,
Yeah. Yeah,
and I think that's something too that like really frustrated me about because again when it came to CCM, what I was holding on to was the melodies, right, and the production, not the actual lyrics.
Right.
But then when I started to think about it, it was like there's nothing there. And being so surprised in general with so many aspects of sort of contemporary American Christianity where there was just so little, there was nothing under the hood. And the moment that you tried to figure something out and you tried to question anything, it was shut down because why would you ever want to question anything? Like, God is in control, and you're like a lot of people would use the church and the faith as a panacea for difficult experiences or questions that they otherwise would have been asking. And there's something very painful to me about having seen a lot of people really just kind of shut down rather than trying to figure out what it is that they want and need in life. Yeah. And again, that's just, I find that unconscionable.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely it. I mean, the constant, I don't know, dealing with a lot of, a lot of personal turmoil or whatever, and you combine that with just the combined, just constantly looking behind the curtain and seeing there's nothing there with a lot of evangelical media it's a constantly dispiriting thing. And so it's you either just don't ever try to look behind the curtain, or when you do, eventually it wears down, and I think it just breaks down people's faith. Like, I think evangelicalism is like hostile, and oftentimes if you were not a convert, it is hostile probably to maintaining your faith if you're raised in it. I think if you are the kind of person that likes to ask questions.
Well, and I think that's because evangelicalism, at least traditional American evangelicalism, has kind of a sales first mentality, right?
Yes.
Like, you're always supposed to be out there and winning souls, right? It is primarily and fundamentally predicated on this idea that if your faith is strong, you're going to be able to go out there and get other people in, and that their faith will make your faith stronger, and we'll build this sort of let's call it a pyramid of faith, maybe, where the faith of everybody in your downline rolls back up to your faith. The top
one. Yeah, so you want to be making sure you.
And if you get enough people to enjoy your faith, we have this set of fantastic knives.
If you ever wanted to be your own boss, if you ever wanted to be your own preacher, there you go.
Does that make sense, though? I mean,
no, absolutely. Yeah, no, I think that's it's a lot about getting people in, but not like maintaining something. And like, I think that's I don't know. I think that's the issue that a lot of evangelicalism deals with, is just the inability to maintain a community without it eventually turning into, well, I mean, maybe their beliefs of hierarchy probably cause this, turn into abusive and self-destructive situations oftentimes.
Yeah.
Like you could, if you like didn't know the second half of the Mark Driscoll story and you were just hearing the conversions and you were an evangelical, I don't at all, I'm not at all surprised you would be like, this is dope as shit. Because it's all about the first part.
And then the other shoe drops.
Yes. It's an environment that encourages a lot of narcissists to kind of put themselves in position of power. I think that's just been repeatedly shown as true. I don't know.
Yeah, I didn't experience personally that super manipulative type of leadership.
I didn't have a bunch
in my own life. The pastors who I grew up, that were the pastors of my church. There were really two of them. There was the one pastor who was up until maybe around my teenage years, and then he retired. And then the other pastor who took over, was there up until I was no longer, going to church because I went to college, etc. But like good men, empathetic people, people who really, really care. And it was interesting too, because when I went to last year, I went to a funeral, and it was at the church that I grew up in, and I saw that pastor, who is not the pastor there anymore, but he still goes there, and I saw him, and that was the most probably. Yeah, I don't think it's unfair to say, like, because I don't go back very often. Probably the most emotional reunion that I had during my time being back, and it was like, even though I wouldn't say that I ever like went up to him when he was a pastor and was like, "Pastor, I have questions about the Bible," or anything like that. It was just more, I remembered him, he remembered me, he saw that I was in a time of really deep, deep sorrow. Yeah. And I knew that he had experienced deep, deep sorrow too, because he just lost his wife a couple years ago. And it was just like, yeah, you see me, and I remember you, and I remember how much you loved me when I was one of your flock, as it were. And it was really powerful. And those are the sorts of things about the church and community of the church that really hit still. Mm. But there's so much fucking bullshit,
Right. Yeah.
And that sounds so millennial. It's like, oh, but I don't know. I think that my ideal church, but it's like, yeah, whatever. But I don't know.
No, I thinking through a lot of this for a long time. Also, yeah, it's just it's church has like a really important place in a lot of people's lives, and it had an important place in my life for a good chunk, and. I think it probably speaks to some sort of failure of, I don't know, institutions in America or whatever, that there aren't many equivalents. And I'm not saying like necessarily that there need to be like, I don't know, that we need to find ways to make clubs into churches or something. But like, I feel like even 50 years ago, 100 years ago or something, even the bar would maybe be more of an experience of like, this is my, my buddy who knows me and I come here every day or something like that.
Yeah,
like,
no, of course.
There's no sense of community anymore. And so I think because of that, it makes stepping away from evangelicalism really hurt, because you had an abusive community sometimes, but a community nevertheless.
Yeah. I mean, that's what, Robert Putnam talks about in Bowling Alone, right? It's like this idea that where did these institutions go? Right? Mm-hmm. Why? Because like the example that he uses, obviously, in Bowling Alone is the bowling league, where back in the 60s, everybody bowled in a league. It was just kind of the thing to do. There still are bowling leagues, obviously, but I am personally a very passionate bowler. And I've seen, and even over the course of my lifetime, I've seen bowling go from something where it's maybe a bit marginalized, but there's still a lot of leagues and people take it seriously, to something that is almost exclusively used for like birthday parties, or you or you just go to the lanes and you bowl alone. But there's not so much of this social capital of people showing up to the same thing every week, spending time together, being in community with each other, and that is something that is really important. And I feel like, especially with the pandemic, a lot of the remaining stuff that we had just got the heart ripped out of it. Yeah. And I don't know where we go from here, honestly, because there does seem something peculiarly American to me about this as well. When I went back to the UK, I was back in London in when was it? Like May, and there is a much stronger sense there of social cohesion. And it's not good, to be clear. Things are not good in the UK right now.
What are you talking about?
In pubs are certainly not what they were pre-pandemic, but there is still a stronger, I think, more vibrant sense of that kind of community than there is here. We've become so atomized. And when you hear people talk about this in the context of the church, which they often do, it's like, well, how do we get these teens back into the church? And it's like, you're missing the point entirely. The way I see it, the issue is not, they don't love God enough and we need to be more doctrinaire about it so that they understand God better to keep them in the church. It's people have been failed by every institution imaginable, and why should the church be any different?
That's a great way. That's a great way of putting it. Yeah, because I mean, like, I think if anybody did genuinely like the Episcopal Church got an insane decline right now. So there's a lot of conversation among Episcopalians of like, how do we save the church here? People don't come. And I mean, one of the probably best ways anyone, could make a church attractive is by just conveying that it's not going to be an abusive environment.
Yeah.
Like finding a way to just genuinely convey, like, you're not going to get here, and then just get fucking railroaded,
I mean, like, that could be difficult though, because if you do it the wrong way, then, your shirt is answering a lot of the questions.
Right.
People will be asking questions.
Yeah,
about your shirt. Questions already addressed on it. My church does not abuse children, things like that,
But yeah, I mean, aside from that, but you're also right, is just like beyond just church, it's just more like, I mean, the fact that people aren't going to church is one of many of the institutions that are eroding right now. Right. Like, people just don't know how to communicate with each other anymore. I was thinking of, you mentioned COVID especially. I've been thinking about this since COVID, because I was working at a coffee shop when COVID hit, and so I had to quit. And my life before the pandemic and afterwards, like before the pandemic, I would, if I was working that evening, say, I might go to the coffee shop a couple hours early and read, with the assumption I would probably run into somebody I knew, and then we might go grab lunch or something before my shift. And that just happened all the time. And it happened to me recently where I went to a coffee shop, ran into somebody I hadn't seen in like a year, and got chatting, and like it happened again. And I was like, what? I haven't had this happen to me in like 2-3 years. And this is what my daily life used to be like.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And people miss it. Like, fundamentally, there is a desire for that. But also, I don't know, another analogy that I could use for this, or not analogy, another example of like communities breaking down. This is a big problem in theater right now. And being somebody who has worked in theater quite a bit, not currently, but I eventually probably will end up getting sucked back into it again, because theater is the way that some people talk about like drugs and shit. That's just theater for me. It's like I know it's not good for me. I know that it's going to take away so much of my life and my money and my time, but I can't help myself. I got to get into that theater. But there was an article in the Times about how the traditional institutional theater, which has in terms of tickets, really relied on this 50 to 70-year-old demo to like buy full season packages and come to every show. That model is falling apart because they're not suddenly with the pandemic. Suddenly everybody was like, okay, what do I really value? What do I really want? What do I want to do? What do I want to be? What do I want to see? And many of them, being old people with bad taste, were like, well, I don't want to have to be subjected to anything that doesn't fully line up with what I'm expecting. I don't want these woke plays, shit like that.
Right.
And on the other end, I think some people just in good faith realized, oh yeah, I don't miss this.
Right.
And so they stopped going. Same thing happened with church, right? A lot of people just weren't really being provided for by the community in a meaningful way. They were just doing it to do it. And so on the one hand, people have become a lot more selective about what they want to do. And they're sort of applying a framework of, well, what kind of value does this deliver to me? Yeah. But I think on the flip side, because people are less willing to just do things for the sake of doing them, you have fewer of those casual, surprising interactions that actually make life interesting. And that's a bummer.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Like, people are kind of like catering their social experiences in a sense to like try to make sure that they don't have to deal with weirdness like you're mentioning there. But it's what's hard is like imagining how to even fix this as a problem. Like, obviously as an individual, I don't even know, but like even just in a more collective sense, like how do we create more community? And especially like after COVID, for instance, I actually returned to church after COVID was when I started going back after, spending about 3 years out of it. And it was in part because, I wasn't in church and then went to COVID and realized I didn't, but I was like, dealing with the COVID loneliness, and I think that brought me more that direction. But I was going to say, the outside of a church, one of the big only times I felt that deep, like we've been talking about, that deep emotional sense of community, was actually the protests that year.
Yeah.
And
yeah. Same.
Those were like borderline religious experiences for me. Yeah.
No, I mean, New York in 2020 was fucking crazy, especially that summer. It was just, part of it was I had, at the very beginning of the pandemic, like right at the very beginning, I have a pretty serious like disease, that at the time when news about the pandemic was coming through, it's like, oh shit, will this kill me? And I had the ability to, at that point, go to a really isolated place, honestly, and shelter in place there in Michigan for a while. I don't regret that decision. I think it was the right thing to do at the time, given what I knew, because I wanted to, first of all, it was something that was available to me. And secondly, I wanted to keep my neighbors safe. I didn't want to, like, part of it was protecting myself, but part of it also was protecting everybody around me.
Right.
But I remember then being in just totally isolated in the middle of nowhere, seeing these reports coming in about what was happening. I was, for a time, helping some friends who were out there, like, on the streets. I was watching the police scanner and map and stuff like that and being like, heads up, there are police over here.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Sort of like doing my lifelong dream of being the guy at the computer in a fucking procedural,
Yeah, just dramatic, like, I'm in.
I'm in. Careful. There's a group of police coming down West Broadway. Make sure to divert your tracks. And then getting back and like being like literally getting back and going across the fucking was it the Brooklyn Bridge, and like that there were protesters on the bridge, and like we had snacks in the back of our car. They're like, here, have some snacks, have some water, have some whatever. It felt like this incredible inflection point. And then it all just went away because the government did, as is always the case, just enough to diffuse sort of the absolute edge of the protest. And it felt like this incredible moment where anything could happen. And then it just kind of didn't.
It's, I think this is part of why I had a lot of emotions while playing Disco Elysium. Because I think that like the last few years has been a real sense of living in the like wake of a failed revolution.
Yeah.
And I think that's frankly what it feels like. I think there was a moment that beyond just like the more, the actual demands of fixing policing, there was just a sense of like getting to know your neighbor again that seemed to take place when everyone came out and protested. And especially when it was a few months into COVID, so you hadn't seen a lot of friends and you end up in the streets and like, that was a crazy summer for me as well. Like I've talked about this on this show a few times, so I don't want to, rehash it for anyone who'd be bored with me talking about it. But I would say like, it was an insane summer because Des Moines, Iowa is not a big place. And yet we had like fucking tanks coming out. Like it was like just realizing my tiny town was this funded by cops. We just got crushed. But there were like 3 or 4 weeks at least of just like actually Des Moines feeling like a city I would want to live in.
Yeah.
And it sucks.
Yeah. I mean, the town that I again grew up in, Grand Rapids, you might have heard it was in 2022, it was last year, but you might have heard that story about the cop that Patrick Lyoya was the name of the man who there was a cop who just like apprehended him, kneeled on him, and then just fucking executed him basically. Just shot him straight up. Police, of course, tried to claim that he had a weapon on him, and he was, they both reached for the gun, like literally the thing from Chicago, the musical.
Right.
But like, no, he executed him, and there's been something so disheartening about seeing the way that violence, state-sanctioned violence, the way that the state has the monopoly over the use of force and will not hesitate to use it in any way, shape, or form, and that said use of force will generally be backed up by Christian people and churches and things like that. Because that was the other thing about that really brief window.
I'm so glad you brought this up. Yep. Yeah.
No, go for it. Go for it.
Well, I mean, I was going to say just that was one of the weirdest parts of that time for me, is going out in the streets, having probably some of the most religious feeling experiences I'd had in years, just being around people, fighting for a cause that was just, and seeing on Facebook the people I grew up with, not only just cheering on the cops, but actively wishing that I would get harmed. They wouldn't say that to me specifically, but they'd be like, somebody should, drive through these protesters.
And then that happened.
And that did happen. And I don't know, that was the weirdest thing, was people I looked up to and respected and I grew up with, whether they realized it or not, actively wishing that I would be killed.
But I think also that something was surprising was the flip side to that, where there were some, again, just for a very brief period of time there were a lot of evangelical and more conservative, like Christian people, churches, who were at the very least saying the words Black Lives Matter, even if they didn't fully know what they were saying. They were at least making what appeared to be at the time a genuine attempt.
That's a great point too, yeah.
But that didn't stick around for very long either, because it was pretty easy to defang these very specific political demands by being like, well, ultimately this is just about people being mean racists. And if we just listen to each other, and if we just open up our hearts, then we can solve racism, and completely ignoring any of the actual material demands that, of course, create the structural reality of racism, because that's easier to do. And so there was so much, I remember that too, being so much emphasis on, for some churches that wanted to appear at least moderate, saying a lot of the words, but doing very little in terms of actual concrete action. Which, again, disheartening.
Very disheartening.
But not surprising.
Yeah. We were lucky enough that some of the liberal churches around here turned out. They would send their pastors in. And there's something about at least a mainline pastor in the cleric outfit walking alongside protesters. I thought that was just at the very least pretty powerful as a optical thing or whatever. But yeah, I mean, you're right that there was a brief moment where it felt like some evangelicals were, kind of reflecting on it. I think there's been a handful of things lately in evangelicalism that I think I've watched some of the more good-hearted parents of my friends and stuff like that have some questioning moments. I think Ravi Zacharias was a big one recently as well. Do you know? Did you follow that much?
I didn't follow it. I mean, I'm familiar with him, but
no, that he got outed as a sex pest after he died.
Oh, okay.
And that shook, at least among some of the people I grew up around. That was really shocking for them, and a lot of, there were a lot of I saw a lot of former evangelical moms reading Jesus and John Wayne for a bit.
Sure.
And it was kind of cool, but then again, just kind of fizzled out. And
I do want to get Kristen on the show sometime. She's a professor at the school that I went to.
Calvin. Yeah. She seems really great. Yeah.
She's one of the few remaining academics at that school. That Calvin is a fucking shambles, dude. It's there's a few, again, there's a few professors who do genuinely good work who are still holding on, and I don't know why. I genuinely don't know why. It's up to them, I guess. It's their decision, and I do understand how if you've been in place somewhere for a very long time, the idea of going somewhere else is scary, particularly if you have tenure. But that, you want to talk about evangelical or evangelical-ish institutions that have fucking fallen apart. It's so depressing to see what has happened to Calvin College specifically. And a lot of that actually did have to do with sort of the twin economic pressures of what's going on in higher education more broadly, which is to say people are now asking if the money is worth it because the sticker price is just so stupid high.
Yep.
And then on the other hand, the social pressures of the contrasts that were really brought out by the past few years. It's become, I think, in many ways, just a fully nakedly reactionary institution. And it was never truly progressive. Like, it was the kind of place where, you know, you could get expelled for having sex, things like that. But, I do remember that there were at least, you know, every single professor who really gave a shit about me there is now gone. They're somewhere else. And I double majored too. So like that's
a lot of professors.
That's two full departments that are just, that have had pretty much complete turnover now.
Yeah.
It's a mess. I don't know if that's connected or not. It's just a thought that I had about the degradation of these institutions, I guess.
Well, I think in general, it's funny because I'm not going to go to bat for evangelicalism 10 years ago, but I think there's a degradation of evangelicalism that's taken place. And not to be cliche, but I mean, it really has been since Trump. I think is really.
Oh, no, absolutely. That's not cliche at all. That's just an observation of material reality.
And, you know, I mean, a big part of why, I mean, I really kind of left the faith like right around the early days of the Trump admin when I went into, you know, for a while. And like, it was because of that. I watched like so many people I'd looked up to going after somebody that I just clearly saw was against the values that they had raised me with. And it was just like, this doesn't add up anymore. And that was kind of the final straw for me.
Yeah.
But like, you know, I think that in general, I've just kind of watched this happen where like some of the more like nice, like moms of my, you know, friends that I grew up with have just become complete psychos. Where,
now they're moms for liberty or whatever.
Yeah. And now they're, you know, like I know a friend of my mom's who is refusing to get the vaccine and will not be able to get a life-saving surgery because she is so insistent on not taking the vaccine.
Come on, dude. Like, that just makes me angry, honestly.
It's same.
Like,
it's just,
because it's so fucking stupid, and I don't tolerate stupidity well, having grown up around a great deal of it. It's just this abject ignorance. And it comes from this place where, like, your ideological framework gets in the way of your ability to process information in any sort of a rational way.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then it's like, well, what is there even a way out of this? I don't know if there is. I go back and forth on this too, to the Trump point. Like, I've been bouncing around back and forth on, like, if Trump's convicted, which I personally expect that he will be, unless he manages to like pardon himself because he gets elected president before the trial finishes, which is also a possibility. Like, I think the Trump conviction will have effects for the idea of the rule of law, right? Like, it will explicitly make it so that Trumpism is effectively an illegal movement. But does that actually make things better in a practical sense? Does that decrease or increase the likelihood of civil war? Like, these are not questions that we've had to think about in the past in this country in this way.
No. And you know, like, yeah, that would increase the chance of civil war. But then also, like, well, would it even be right to not charge somebody if it would cause a civil war? Like, well, you know, isn't there also just the right decision rather than the pragmatic decision here to charge him? Like, I don't know. I go back and forth on whether it would
you have to charge him. You have to charge him.
Like, I think you can't not, because that communicates then that you can keep doing this, that this is acceptable, that attacking democracy is fine. Yeah. And like,
and not just attacking. I mean, I don't really care about the idea of like attacking democracy. Sorry, you didn't say it that way. I don't know why I said it that way. But like, look, if you have a country and you have this document that is the law of the land, and that document has been egregiously violated in numerous ways, there needs to be a consequence for that, or the idea of the rule of law is a complete fucking joke.
It's absolutely. Yeah,
even though I hate the Constitution, I think it's a shitty fucking document. But like,
I hate the Constitution because I like democracy.
That's right. Oh, good for you. Good for
you. No,
you're the one saying go Robert Mueller and the rule of law.
That's right. Yeah. The rule. No, but like, I think it's natural. It's going to happen. But then, I mean, are we about to have a fucking civil war? Because the rot is just so deep. And what's weird is just like knowing that the insurrectionary faction would be the people I grew up around. Like, those are the people that would start setting off the bombs, you know, like, I don't know. It's a weird it's weird to come out of this, like, culturally, come out of, like, Christian conservatism, I think.
Well, and here's a question that I have, I guess, because you mentioned that, the contradictions have been heightened by the Trump administration.
Right,
obviously.
absolutely.
That's a very original statement. That's something nobody's ever said before.
No one's ever said this before.
I personally am always saying this, but nobody else has ever said it. Do you think that, like how much of it is chicken and egg? You know what I mean? Like, did evangelical conservatism create Trump, or did Trump shape the movement in his own image, or is it a little bit of both?
It's both. It is a chicken and egg situation, because it's hard to even answer that, because so the contradictions were there, obviously, and there's something to the idea that, like, if Trump didn't exist, it would be necessary for evangelicals to create him. You know what I mean? Like, I think that
they did it before with George W. Bush, right? Like,
right. I think that Trump, though, is, like, even more than Bush in, like, I mean, just an explosion of id, right? Because I think how repressive evangelical Christianity tends to be, there's an outlet for that, and you want it to be this horny rage monster that, you know, wants to go and fucking, you know, like, unleashing all of your dark impulses, right, as a person. Yeah. So I think there's an extent to which, like, a Trump-like figure was necessary, because there needed to be a way to, like, engage in direct sadism while still, like, justifying it as your own, you know, within your own religious views. And so you needed somebody who's he's like David, you know, he's flawed, but, like, we're all getting off on his cruelty. And that's, like, what they don't want to admit.
Right. Yeah, no, and they never will. But you're exactly right that it's these deep impulses of anger that they are not able to express directly, because you know this as well as I do, in sort of the traditional evangelical way of living, the one thing you can't be is angry, right? Not directly, which isn't to say that these people aren't angry. They're filled with anger. And I grew up being filled with anger. And if you want to, you know, connect it back to the whole question of, like, oh, well, what was your, you know, how does this part of your upbringing pull through to who you are now? You know, I grew up really with this anger about a lot of things in my life, a lot of material circumstances, the reality of again, the disease that I have, like being like, well, why the fuck did I get dealt this hand? And then when I became an adolescent, you know, as I hit puberty and really started to feel my feelings, I was just so angry. And that anger carried through as well into college, when I was even angrier when I got to college, because I think I thought on some level, well, I'll go out, I'll be on my own, I'll be a bit more independent. And then all of these sort of strange things that have been forced upon me will sort of start to fade into the background, and I can become a self-actualized, you know, individual.
Yeah.
But I made the mistake of going to a fucking evangelical Christian college. And so it just got worse.
Yeah, and you built up probably a lot of resentment. I mean,
so much resentment.
Yeah,
like,
I believe it.
I can't even put words to it. But I didn't want to acknowledge it. I didn't want to acknowledge the idea that I was an angry person, because Christians aren't angry. Christians aren't angry. Like, you can have your righteous anger like Jesus when he flipped the tables, but, like, you're not allowed to be angry, because that is in direct, contradiction with the idea of being gracious and, you know, presenting all of these other supposedly Christ-like attributes. But that way of looking at it is actually not about doing those things at all. It's just about suppressing how you really feel. And so I think you're exactly right that Trump creates that release valve that they are not willing to give themselves. And that is also why they won't talk about it directly. They won't say, by and large, yeah, I fucking love when he goes up there and, you know, says what he says about immigrants and stuff like that. Because that's not politic. That's not the way that things are done. That's not kind. That's not nice. That's not polite. You can't get away with that in Ottawa County, Michigan. But what you can do is you can create sort of an imagined enemy. You can create the woke, right? Yep. And then that becomes the thing that you can pin everything to. What you're not allowed to do, though, is attack a target with specificity, because that's mean, that has rage to it, that has anger. But if you're directing that rage in a righteous way, in a holy way, again, toward the woke, then you're good. Then you're like Jesus. Then you're flipping over the tables yourself.
Yeah.
It's a little long-winded, but I mean that's I think how those concepts connect.
I think it connects really nicely. And yeah, I mean, I remember this the same kind of like hostility to anger, and it's so weird how it's anger is getting more and more accepted among evangelicals in the last few years in light with the release valve that was Trump. But that being said, to answer like your original question about the kind of chicken and egg situation with Trump and evangelicals, I also think Trump is adjusting evangelicals in his own image, and I think that comes out in the kind of what we're talking about here, that anger is getting more acceptable among evangelicals in the last few years.
Yes.
That's the Trumpification of evangelicals.
Yes.
You know, and you also see that with the rise in like the growth of the Southern Baptist Church, and the way that like Trump has been bringing people into the Southern Baptist Church, which is like becoming, you know, coming kind of a crisis between the moderates and the like insane reactionaries within the church because of that. But yeah, I mean, there's a slow takeover happening of that denomination from being a conservative denomination to being a full out rabid fascist denomination. And a lot of it is, you know, the encouragement of, you know, like culture war shit driving people into churches for political reasons.
Yes. Well, in that, it's not just the SBC where that's happening either. Like, just to go back to the CRCNA again, it's funny, I still think of it as we. It's still technically my church. I'm still technically a member. I don't tithe, though.
You're a bad member, but a member.
Yeah. At Synod this past year, you know, the big governing convention where they vote on what the church's official policies are going to be, there was a big to-do over this paper that had been brought forward where ultimately they did a committee. The committee came out with this series of recommendations about, they called it the Human Sexuality Report, or the HSR. And fundamentally, their guidance on this was, we need to affirm the position that the idea of having a gay thought isn't a sin, but acting on a gay thought is.
This is similar to what happened in the LCMS, I bet.
And so this is something they'd been kicking the can down the road on for a bit. And so they had to come back and they had to make a decision because one of the churches in the denomination ordained a gay, I want to say elder, and that forced the issue, right? Because if the idea is in this church, it is a confessional issue that, you know, gay sex is a sin, basically, and that same-sex relationships are sinful, then you can't ordain a gay clergy member, and you certainly can't perform same-sex marriages. And so this came to a head at Synod this past year. And there were some guys who, I watched a bit of the debate, both this year and last year, because it was actually, this has been an issue for the past couple of years. There were some fascists.
I would like to just make a couple things clear, Mr. Chairman, for all of us, and that is women in office and racial minorities have been mentioned multiple times, cited in relation to Neyland Avenue as well as the HSR. Again, unless any of us would say differently, Mr. Chairman, which I hope we would not, conflating race, ethnicity, and being a female with homosexual sex and same-sex marriage is a very dangerous place to go. We're also not isolating this particular sin, Mr. Chairman. I believe we're being specific. And what I mean by that is we are referencing a particular case in which one of the sins in the HSR was violated by an office bearer. And as of today, we have officially voted to grant this a confessional status, and this HSR is what I'm referring to. Mr. Chairman, I'd like all of us to think about this. If this body claims to be a family, then we should not be urging churches and classes to spur the guidance and the decision and the wisdom of this body.
Thank you. We have mourned and lamented the way we've dealt with our LGBTQ brothers and sisters. We have just set the bar impossibly high to do that in love. I don't know how we do that when you come people who are seeing the gift. I wish we had the breath to interpret these scriptures as not pertaining to homosexual activity in a committed marriage. We can still have a high standard of marriage. But now you have these folks.
Mr. Chairman, point of order. We just made a decision, and you have the gall to stand up there and tell the body that you are not going to abide by what the body decided and what they gave the General Secretary to do. Please stop.
Like, I don't feel like it's an exaggeration to say that in the way that they were presenting, in the way that they were appealing to sort of certain standards of tradition and, you know, those sorts of things. It's like, no, I see you. Like, you might not be like a fully paid up member of the Proud Boys, but that is your ideology. And you are seeking to take the church in that direction. And that's exactly what happened. The report passed, and then this year they doubled down on it. They sanctioned the church that ordained the gay elder, and it is now fully a confessional issue that in the CRC, no homo is the law of the land. And it was one of the most upsetting things I've ever seen.
Was it? I mean, what was it? And of course, it's homophobic either way. But did they come down on the decision that even having the gay thought is the sin? Like just having the urge? Okay.
No, because that's never been like the CRC did their original report on gay shit back in like the 70s. I want to say like they were actually a little ahead of the curve on this for evangelical denomination, and that was the conclusion they came to at the time. So the question was, should we just reaffirm that? Or should we? There's also some horrible fucking mealy-mouthed language about whether or not being trans is okay. They don't really come down on it one way or the other. They just talk about how like we need to give them care and we need to give them support and we need to show them Christ's love.
and what does that support mean? What does that love mean? Like what is that? You know, materially, what does that look like?
And it doesn't say. It's so shockingly vague, and intentionally so, because when it comes down to, again, everything to do with like same-sex marriage and gay clergy members, it is crystal fucking clear.
And that's always the question I ask when I've talked to evangelicals about this before, where I've gotten into these kind of discussions where they're like, well, look, you know, my church's position is that homosexuality is a sin, but it's between you and God. And, you know, we're not going to come down on you or whatever. It's something you come to on your own. I'm like, that sounds great. Can an elder be gay? Mm-hmm. Because that's what the question is.
Right.
We'll love them, we'll support them, whatever. But like materially, are you excluding them from aspects of the church? Then like you're not supportive,
right?
You know, and so just fucking admit it. But I was going to say with the LCMS version of this was almost more extreme than what you were describing in the Reformed denomination there, because I talked about this on Mammonburg before, but their report on like I think it was the updated concordance. I'd have to double check, but you know the statement it had about sexuality was that it's a sin, but being gay is not a sin, right? Like you can't. Doing something with it, which is the traditional conservative
position. That's the CRC position, essentially.
That's what I was raised on. That's what people were mad at.
Oh. Huh.
And that was what scared me with a lot of the fascists in the LCMS, the open fascists like Corey Mahler and stuff.
Right.
Was the church was really like coming to grips with the fact that there was no longer just good old fashioned homophobia, but truly genocidal people in the church.
Yes.
And that's, you know, and I feel like that's what a lot of churches have been going through right now is even the most conservatives are suddenly waking up and realizing that they're in a fascist church, that their congregation has become fascist overnight.
Well, and I think in the case of CRCNA specifically, that these guys who I noticed at Synod as clearly being fascists. I mean, again, I'll see if I can send you some clips or whatever, because I don't use the term fascist lightly. There is a very specific aesthetic. There is a very specific way of talking. There is a very specific like sense of authority that they regard and refer to in a very specific way. And I think the only reason that these people have not been outed as out and out fascists is that nobody's bothered to look into it, frankly. Like there was this one guy from fucking Indiana where I was like, oh yeah, no, he's just like the way that he's dressed, the way that he does his hair, the way that he is talking, the way that he is the way that he is like appealing to authority in a way that is directly threatening to other people who are in this synod, it so clearly shows that he regards them as beneath him. And that's fucking scary to me. But where was I going with this thought? Oh, just that I think for these people, this is a big dub, obviously. This is a huge dub for them. I don't think they'll stop, because the nature of the reactionary movement, of course, is to pull things further and further back into an imagined past. And so that probably means that at some point they'll be like the 1970 whatever report actually didn't go far enough. We didn't quite get it right in the first place. We also need to make the adjustments in the same way that you were mentioning, to be like, no, homosexuality is just straight up sinful.
Being homosexual,
being gay, it's sinful, actually. And yeah.
Yeah,
it doesn't matter if you act on it or not. It doesn't matter if you are a man who has sex with another man. At the end of the day, if you're a little swishy,
you're out.
You're out. Well, see ya.
Yeah, I mean that always just, I don't know, that mentality drives me insane, because the only way I was able to maintain, into like, I mean, it really started fading by the end of high school, but even maintain the conservative position on that as a young evangelical was believing, well, that's not the person who's wrong. It's just everyone has sin, and that's theirs. But when you get rid of it, even that, and it's just like you as a person are a sin. Like, I mean, that's something I would have found appalling as a conservative evangelical, and it's becoming the fucking norm among a lot of evangelicals. And that's just vile. It's just fucking vile.
Because theologically, what you're saying is that there is such a thing as a person who cannot be saved, basically.
Yeah. That this is the one group that's found its way out of God's love.
Right.
And like, I mean, that should be seen as blasphemous among supposed Christians, right? And yet,
right.
Man, things are fucked.
They're good to me, actually. I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, things are great. Well, I think we're getting closer to kind of a good wrap up point, but I don't know. Is there anything else you really wanted to bring up, just about, I guess, kind of pulling back to growing up evangelical, anything weird around that you wanted to talk about?
I guess just maybe to say that something that I am in the process of figuring out now, speaking as somebody who has left the vast majority of that shit behind, it's been raptured, actually.
It's been raptured.
Is making peace with myself and being willing to go easy on myself for doing and saying and being certain ways because I just didn't know any better.
Yeah.
Because when I look back on the past version of myself, I cringe a whole lot, and that's not unusual.
Same, yeah.
That's not unusual at all. But I think there's something unique to the violence that American evangelical Christianity inflicts, and I regret having been, even though from a young age I was like poking holes in things.
Yeah,
I still regret having been a part of it, and I regret having sustained it, and I regret having allowed parts of that worldview to shape many of the choices that I made in life. But also, you can't take it back, all you can do is move forward and hope that you're doing right by people. And so that's how I'm trying to be. That's how I'm trying to be now. And I don't know how good of a job I'm doing necessarily, but that's at least the hope. And so I can't look back on my past and be like, well, you fucking asshole, how dare you do that? Because it's who I was at the time. It's the culture I was raised in. It's the only world that I knew. But it turns out there's a much bigger world out there. And I regret that I took so long to find it, but...
Yeah, but it's out there. Yeah.
It's out there.
No, I think that's a great kind of place to end this on too. Just, I don't know, a lot of the evangelical worldview, at least if you were raised in the kind of environment you and I both kind of had, is about drawing lines in the sand of what is and isn't okay, isn't acceptable. And maybe some stuff fell through the cracks, maybe, whatever. But on the whole, you still probably have that internalized. All of us kind of do.
Yeah, it's in your programming.
It's a slow process, but the thing is, like, I don't know. Yeah, there's something about just going. There is so much to explore and learn about out there that's outside of just the purview of what you were raised with.
Yeah.
And it's good to explore it. All right. Well, I think we'll wrap up there. Thank you so much, Josh, for joining me. This has been a blast.
Yeah, thank you, man. I said I'd be relatively lower energy, but then I got all head up, so you know.
That's how it goes.
Yeah, and you know, we don't on our show, you know, evangelicalism is not the core of the show. The core of the shore is the core of the shore. Jesus, the core of the show is analyzing popular culture and particularly seeking to look at and unpack narratives in it. But you know, we do talk about evangelical shit with some frequency. And so if that's at all relevant to your interests, I would say check out our show. It's called, again, The Worst of All Possible Worlds. You can find it in your favorite podcast platform. Our website is worstpossible.world, and our Patreon is patreon.com/worstofall. So yeah, hope to see you there.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of Fruitless. If you like what you heard, consider, rating and reviewing the show on Apple Podcasts, and maybe exploring some of the back catalog here. You can also find the show on Patreon. The link to that is in the show notes. As I've said, I'm not doing a ton with that yet, but bonus content and stuff like that is coming in the future, and I will read your name at the end of the show and all that cool stuff. Up next, I have another interview lined up next week, so hopefully that should be out here in a week or so, and I'm pretty excited about it, so yeah. Of course, don't forget to check out The Worst of All Possible Worlds if you haven't listened to it before, and if you're coming from The Worst of All Possible Worlds, you can check out Mannenberg, the show that I'm more regularly on. Yeah, I think that's about it. Have a good one, everyone. Goodbye.